Croeso, Prynhawn da, as we say in Wales, good afternoon, and such a warm welcome to those who are joining us this afternoon for this discussion session. We will present some ideas, my colleague Marlen Komrowski and myself, both from Clwstwr, and we'd love to talk to you more about the Clwstwr Programme and the work that we've been doing around cross-sector innovation. We do want this to be a conversation though, so we are keen for you to input and ask questions, and also at the end there are some ways of us engaging with you around the content that we've been talking about. So we hope that it will be quite a relaxed session and a knowledge sharing session. If we could go on to the first slide, please, Marlen. So maybe because there's a small enough group of us and I can see everybody if I scroll through, can you put your hand up if you have been to Cardiff or been to Wales? No, anyone been to Wales apart from Marlen? Okay, well that's really useful because that helped me frame Cardiff, our capital city of Wales, and start to tell you the story of Clwstwr and the work that we do at Clwstwr. So Cardiff is the capital city of Wales. It is a small city, actually. It has a population of around 360,000. So it's a relatively small European capital city. It's coastal, it's on the water. And it has a very well-known industrial heritage. Which is largely derived from its coal history around coal export and also steel production and export of steel. And that is a story that has been well told around the world. At one stage, the Cardiff docks in the bay, you can see an image there in the top left-hand corner, was the largest exporter of coal in the world. So that's what Cardiff was known for. It was the first city in the world to cash a £1 million check. Such was the value of the coal production here. And that actually made for a city that is a real melting pot. There's a good level of diversity here in Cardiff that we're very proud of from the many people who have come from across the world to work in coal and steel production. The reason I picked the period 99 to 2019, that's much, much more recent, is because as coal and steel declined, it was important for Cardiff, the city, and the region around it, which has a much greater population than the city itself, up to 2.2 million people plus in that kind of drive to work area. Is that we had to rethink what our primary industry was going to be here, or what our key industries were going to be here. And they focused a lot on kind of the knowledge and content and service sectors, and most specifically to this presentation, focusing on the creative and cultural industries. So a number of the pictures that you've seen there, from the stadium to the BBC headquarters, our National Theatre and Performing Arts Centre, BBC Drama Studios, and a large co-working space, the one with the yellow marker at the bottom, the Glowworks, that co-locates a number of different creative businesses. And that is the story of Cardiff in the last 20 years. It's a real redevelopment and growth and rebirth, if you like, embracing the creative and cultural industries. Not wholly surprising in a nation where storytelling and song, music and narrative is such a big part of the culture here. So on to the next slide, please, Marlen. Here we are. So here are some of the titles that you may be familiar with that have recently come out. This development, not just in infrastructure, in skills and talent and business growth, has led to lots of content that has been made here and distributed around the world. And actually that kind of content travels, that identity and brand travels. So there are a number of titles here, some you may be familiar with: Doctor Who, Torchwood, Sherlock, Keeping Faith, Sex Education, which I think up until very recently was one of the largest or most watched, most downloaded titles on Netflix that was produced in the region here. His Dark Materials on HBO, and A Discovery of Witches on Sky. So these are titles that are taking the story of Wales, if you like, and the story of the quality of the content produced in Wales all out and around the world. Okay, next slide, please, Marlen. So alongside all of this development in the creative and cultural industries here, there's been an additional development across the UK for some years and focus on the creative and cultural industries. When the creative industries industrial strategy, when the UK government industrial strategy was launched about 4 or 5 years ago, there was a creative industry sector deal within it. That's really critical because it was the first time in the UK that we'd had a countrywide, a UK-wide industrial strategy that so strongly had the creative industries rooted and named within it. Part of that was an £80 million programme to develop 9 creative clusters across the UK where there were particular strengths. Now we bid, our university, Cardiff University, led a bid with other partners in the region, 2 other universities, to develop Clwstwr, a focus on research and development and innovation for the creative industries, and to develop a creative cluster here, to brand it, to identify it, and to inject money into it to develop the businesses who were working here. And that's where Clwstwr was formed. And that was 2 years ago now. There are a number of other significant partners bringing large amounts of funding to support Welsh Government, the BBC, BBC Wales, Arts Council of Wales, and the City Council, our local municipal government. Thanks, Marlen. So Clwstwr's all about creating this culture of innovation. We know, and it's well reported, you know, that it's not just, and I think COVID and coronavirus this year has shown us even more strongly, it's not just about, it's not anymore about thriving, it's about surviving. And actually, you know, whether it's thrive or survive, innovation is absolutely at the heart of it. So planning for innovation, discussing collaboration, thinking about business development, commercialization and future is a really big part. That is what Clwstwr is all about, supporting businesses in our cluster here in Cardiff, where there is already this strength to grow and develop further what people are doing. And naturally, that lends itself to cross-sector innovation, the point that we'll come on to in a minute. But I'm really keen that you understand the different building blocks and why we are where we are. So for us, it's about giving money to companies to invest in R&D and innovation. And then my final slide before I hand over to Marlen to continue is about the kind of money that we have distributed so far. So in September 2009, we funded our first group of projects, 23 projects worth a total of £2 million to develop 23 new products, services, or experiences that would enter the market and bring back value to those businesses and individuals. We had a seed project round in March 2020. That's this year. This year feels like it's been about 10 years, but it really was just the beginning of this year. And those seed projects are really key because they invest in early stage ideas and individuals to develop and grow bigger projects. We funded some of those bigger projects in September this year, 33 more, putting again another £2 million out into that environment. So quite significant contribution there. And you can see pictures of individuals, freelancers and companies who have had the opportunity to get this funding and invest in their future through innovative projects. Over to you, Marlen.
Thank you, Sarah, and hello, everyone. Thank you for all of the other people who joined a little bit later. And I am working as the impact analyst for the Clwstwr Programme. And I'm myself German, so I see a lot of German people here in this group as well. So I understand where you're coming from in a sense of where is Cardiff, what does Cardiff stand for, because it doesn't have a very big international reputation, even though it's very, very involved into media making that reaches international audiences. So I want to a little bit give you some background numbers on the local cluster and what kind of industries and cross-sector innovation we are handling with the Clwstwr Programme. So first, I would like to talk about our main target sector in the program, which is the media sector and specifically the film and TV sector, because there are the strength in the local industry in Cardiff and the surroundings and in Wales. And we can see that research shows that further consolidation of the audiovisual sector in certain geographic regions worldwide is currently happening. So at the moment, the US, Canada, India, and Japan are still the leading film and TV production locations, but the UK has become already the biggest audiovisual producer in Europe. And there has been a huge boost in recent years with film and TV production spend at an all-time high in the UK, and increased by 16% in 2019 alone, which was especially driven by new platforms like Netflix, VOD platforms who increasingly invest in media production. And Cardiff has become, based on our estimations and within the wider framework of the UK, as such a big leader in the media sector, the third biggest film and TV production center in the UK by now. And this was achieved just in the last years with huge growth patterns. So it's right after London and Manchester if it comes to production of media. Then the last years, the local sector, and Sara mentioned already, has managed to attract high-end TV and film productions to the region, including Doctor Who, Sherlock, His Dark Materials, and so on. And for a rather small nation of just 366,000 people, now 7% of the workforce are in production, distribution, and post-production, which is one of the highest sectoral concentrations in the UK. Based on our analysis and estimations, there are now around 1,600 firms in the media and audiovisual sector in the Cardiff capital region, so that's the wider region of Cardiff, which employ more than 8,000 people, contributing 350 million GVA to the local economy. And now we really see this high concentration of creative activities in Cardiff, where now 16.5% of all enterprises in Cardiff are part of the creative economy. And there are a lot of indirect effects of the media industry through spillover effects that should not be underestimated. So based on the history of Cardiff coming from this coal region, we really saw that this was one of the major drivers that led the local economy into a more knowledge-based media creative industry that we now find in Cardiff. However, there are, what needs to be kept in mind is that current trends and technological developments are disrupting the media sector, and the local sector is struggling to create real competitive local advantages through innovation in Cardiff. That's where we as Clwstwr come in. We found that, for example, 98% of the local creative businesses are small or micro, which hinders the sector to have the right investment and mentality for structured and strategic innovation. At the same time, R&D process, as we know for other sectors like the gem industry or manufacturing, it is not such an integral part of the creative industry. R&D spent per creative business is way below the UK average, and other industries face similar challenges. While every creative process and media content service might be inherently innovative and creative, it is not the same way how innovation is transferred to more tangible assets like IP and patent creation in these industries. Additionally, we found a low level of productivity in the sector, which points towards a lack of investment in innovation capabilities. And of course, there are numerous other challenges today. For example, with COVID having an above average impact on the audiovisual sector, PwC projected that the UK film and TV sector could shrink by 57% and lose 63 billion pounds in revenues in 2020. And digitization and new content formats and distribution methods create new opportunities, but also threats. So more of the traditional sectors like TV are really losing revenues that has been previously stable and increasing to new players that came into the market. And they're really struggling to keep the revenue in the city and with the traditional players. So this is why the Clwstwr program was designed to overcome these challenges in order to support innovation in the local creative industries and media sector. And we bring sectors, including digital IT sectors, together with the media and creative industries and other sectors to do innovation together. And we focused thereby on combination of funding, research, knowledge exchange, expertise, and networking. And based on this, we prepared 6 lessons we wanted to share with you. So for everyone who's involved in doing a similar program or who wants to create cross-sector collaborations, we defined them and we would like to share with them and maybe hear your thoughts later. So over to you, Sarah.
Great. So before I jump into lesson 1, I suppose it's just worth saying that in terms of the theme of this conference and this session, we've talked to you about Cardiff and where it is and how it fits into Wales. We've talked to you about the creative industries and cultural sector in the city and the region, what our challenges are, and then what Clwstwr set itself up to do to address those. And we've also talked about the fact that we have funding to give to businesses, creative sector businesses in the cluster to do more innovation and R&D. What it is worth saying, just to frame this in its entirety, is what we have seen over the 2 years of us funding those businesses is that increasingly we're getting an appetite and an interest from both creative sector businesses and those from other sectors in partnering to do more of this cross-sector activity. So in the first year of funding, we had, for example, a business who produced content, and they were increasingly moving into health tech, if you like. So they produce immersive content, and their project was all about producing a VR experience for women in labour. And they've worked quite a lot around producing those immersive experiences with health markets in mind, solving issues that are currently being faced by the health health companies and the health sector here. Likewise, this year we had a television production company come to us with an idea for screen content for use on trains, in transit, if you like, on trains across Wales. So more and more we're seeing this cross-sector opportunity. And that's not just being fed from the creative sector end, we're also having it from other sectors who potentially are commissioners of this kind of work. So coming from transport or coming from the health sector or from automotive. So it's very interesting to understand how that works. And I think for the creative sector, that presents a real opportunity in terms of a different way for work to be commissioned and engaged, and offering, real potential there for not just the cross-sector collaboration, but all kinds of knowledge exchange and learning. But it's not easy and straightforward, is it? Cross-sector working is challenging for a whole variety of reasons. So our 6 lessons that we'd like to share with you are what we have seen in this space over the last 2 years, and we're still learning. So lesson 1 is about legitimacy, trust, and long-term commitment, together with shared values being vital to collaboration and innovation processes, and even more so with cross-sector innovation. I think one of the big learning lessons that we've had with Clwstwr is about the importance of credibility and trust, and having a very clear reason for doing things that isn't about short-term gains, it's about a long-term view. I think one of the things that is understood very much, not just by the creative sector locally, but by other sectors, other parts of the economy here in our region, is about a long-term commitment to this work, and a commitment that's quite altruistic. So in terms of the funding that we give to companies, any IP that they create, they are able to retain that value themselves. And that altruistic approach is really important because, as universities, we're not looking to gain from that. What we want is the whole region, every business to uplift, and then the city to uplift, and then the region to uplift in terms of its productivity and output and effect on its bottom line, ultimately, in very simple terms. So in terms of legitimacy and trust, it's been key to us to build a strong brand, a strong communications platform, and a really developed engagement strategy. So we put a lot of resource and time into engaging with all of the people who want to engage with us. So that's all our creative sector businesses and the individuals who work as freelancers or micro businesses, and also all of the stakeholders or other sectors who are keen to engage. Now, we have producers, we have 4 producers in our team. And in the 2 years that we've been active, they've held in excess of 600 one-to-one meetings with different industry partners. that's quite a significant contribution to building trust, to building and sharing knowledge, and to spending time to develop a long-term commitment together, and exploring those shared values together with companies to explain why we're all doing the same thing, working in the same direction. We often talk about building the cluster, and actually the cluster here has been built. It has been built relationship by relationship, meeting by meeting, event by event over that period. And it wasn't something we just did at the start. We continue it all the way through. And that is a very important lesson that we've learned along the way. It was actually, to be fair, it's not just a lesson, it was part of the design of Clwstwr, but we have implemented even more of it as we've gone, when we have seen how important and valuable that activity is. Over to you, Marlen. You're on mute.
Thanks, sorry. Our second lesson that we learned is that innovators should go beyond thinking of direct economic value through innovation, and instead think about long-term sustainability in the innovation process. And this includes also bringing in social impacts and, for example, environmental sustainability into the innovation process. We have found that emerging challenges of global sustainability can kind of catalyze a new round of so-called creative destruction, which innovators and entrepreneurs view increasingly as one of the biggest business opportunities. So in this global discussion, which we have now with Fridays for Futures for environmental impact, if it comes to Black Lives Matters, and all of these things become a much more prominent role in all of our lives. And this also enables more and more people to think creatively and create new innovation around these discussions, and have it in their mind when they talk about innovation processes and what they want to achieve with innovation. So our aim was therefore to help innovators to look beyond this kind of idea, I need to innovate to create a new innovation, to create my own economic impact and change and create more revenue for my business, but to increasingly help them to look beyond this and more into this continuous incremental improvement of existing products and processes, and to see the business world differently and make sustainable opportunities more apparent in their innovation processes. So our focus is hereby on, for example, social inclusion and diversity, as well as environmental impact. And some examples of the projects that we have funded is a project called Inclusive Film, which specifically aims to use new processes to create new inclusive ways to integrate disabled people into both screen production and content. We also support projects that aimed at increasing, for example, democratic participation through news, or the healthcare project that Sara mentioned. So all of these have and aim to really have a social impact as well. In terms of environmental sustainability, we had a project that was called Greening the Screen Sector. So there it was also about really changing the way the industry works to have a long impact, and not only on these new processes and revenue, but see this also as an opportunity to have an impact on other things than just the economic impact of the firm. So what we would like to highlight is that we have learned that bringing in societal goals into the innovation process creates new creative thinking around problems and new technologies. We also follow an agenda to be inclusive and representative if it comes to minority groups in our program, because more diverse people in the innovation process can lead to clear business opportunities and new innovative capabilities. And there is an amazing amount of research now that all supports this idea that the more diverse the team is in our projects, the more innovative and the better the solutions that come out of these innovation processes are. So really the idea here is just that it's not all about creating the short-term impact of new revenue, but really having a sustainable way of approaching, and also using the societal challenges we are facing today to inspire new innovation and cross-sector collaboration for innovation. Over to you, Sara.
I think you were taking that one and I was on 4.
Oh, sorry. I haven't written down my notice, some of the content here, but it's fine. The strategic approach, the lesson 3 is the strategic approach to cross-sector innovation with ongoing systematic efforts, which is key. So what we want to highlight here and what we learned is that in order to build such a program as Clwstwr is right now, we really needed to start from scratch and establish all of these working processes enabled to help businesses from different sectors to collaborate, fund them, and to really guide them through the process. And this was something new for us in the beginning as well. But in the time, we managed to really establish this process, which helped us to go from point A to the goal where the businesses wanted to be in the end. And this included a lot of different processes that we established. If it comes to a customer relationship management system, so we are able to track the what the projects are doing, the engagement that Sara mentioned in lesson 1, really about keeping track of what is happening, trying to help and use our network as best as possible to support them, and really building in all of these strategic ways of helping them along the whole process. So this is something that took us quite a long time to establish all of this, but now that we are there, we are very confident and are able to really help projects because we keep on learning also from what we've done already so far. So that's about lesson 3 and lesson 4.
Okay, so lesson 4 is about our user-centered design approach, which has absolutely been key and crosses all sectors and supports cross-sector innovation activity really well. So when we were successful in developing Clwstwr, on winning one of the UK government's clusters, the 9 in the UK, that obviously came with some funding for us to distribute and to distribute for innovation and R&D activities. Now, if you just give out money to people without giving them a framework in which to work, it can be quite challenging. So we felt that it was really essential early on to build in a sort of a framework or a model to help the businesses who are applying for funding understand how they could undertake their R&D. Now, I think if you work in some sectors, there is a framework or a model for R&D activity. If you think about pharmaceuticals, and this is an issue close to all our hearts, talking about a vaccine for coronavirus. If you think about creating a new drug or treatment in the medical environment, there's a very clear R&D process that is tried and tested and that is understood by that sector, and there are ways of working in order to do that. In the creative sector, it's just not like that. There isn't a similar kind of framework or model through which to go through those processes. There is for individual pieces of content, but not for this kind of broader innovation and R&D activity. So what we did was we employed something called user-centered design, UCD, as it's often referred to. As we saw this as a really useful way of giving people a structure through which to undertake their innovation activity. We felt part of the reason we selected this and we felt it was valuable is because user-centered design, I mean, in a way, the clue's in the title. Users or audiences are very much at the center of what's being considered. I mean, that's kind of essential for all innovation activity, but user-centered design really focus on that. And it also employs design thinking, which is really key in terms of thinking of working with a creative sector. You know, there's lots about the design thinking approach that really speaks to that creative sector. Now, user-centered design was developed in 2004. It's a relatively recent approach, and it utilizes this double diamond framework about discovering, defining, developing, and delivering, and working through an iterative process that moves the ideas through that double diamond design, if you like. Now, it works for designers and it works for non-designers. That's the interesting thing about user-centered design. You don't have to be a designer for this model and framework to really speak to you. And in terms of cross-sector working, this is really key because we feel that we've identified a model for Clwstwr, a way of giving anybody in our cluster tools, if you like, through which to undertake their innovation, but these are tools that speak to both the creative sector and any other sector that we would want to work with. And that's really important. It's not a linear process, it's not a one size fits all, and it doesn't disclude anybody, any partners we'd want to work with. And so we found that model and that approach really helpful to us. Okay, on to lesson 5, and this is for me to talk to again. And this lesson is about accessibility of services and facilitation being absolutely key to enable cross-sector innovation. Now, what we mean by that, I mean, access and accessibility being a key part of this message here. Marlen's already talked about equality, diversity and inclusion, but access for us is absolutely key. This is about finding ways, resources, knowledge, people, signposting, locations, facilities, whatever it is that we can do to enable access for as many people as possible. So you don't just have to be a big anchor firm. You don't have to be a large business. You can be a small business. You can be a freelancer. You can be a one-person operation. You can be students moving into startup to develop their own idea. So access for us, for all, was a really key part of this, including people who are somewhat hidden or often not so clearly apparent to any of the kind of work that we've been doing or to the kind of other structures that may exist. So in order to do that, there's a lot required around facilitation, because it's great to have an approach to access, but actually finding people and engaging them requires a lot of resource. Now, I've already talked about the one-to-one, the 600 one-to-one meetings that our producers have had, but there's a much bigger team encouraging access and facilitation to knowledge through our co-investigators, who are academic colleagues from the 3 universities here, to do that knowledge sharing and translation. Access to resources through digital platforms, access to speakers from inside the cluster and outside the cluster through an extensive events program, and a lot of communication through our website and social platforms to try and reach all the different types of people and as wide a group of users or audience, if you like, as possible. And that does include the general public, because it's quite important that this isn't just a closed project that happens, you know, behind university doors or behind industry doors. We try always to encourage that very broadest sharing of not only what we're doing, but the impact of that and the benefits that we're seeing and the learning that we're seeing, a bit like the session that we're doing today. Okay, lesson 6, final lesson, over to Marlen.
Yes, the final lesson. What we want to highlight here is that cross-sector innovation is not only driven purely by technology. So for the innovation process that we at Clwstwr facilitate, there is quite often a mindset of the people that you need driving new technology of your innovation. And this is something that can hinder a lot of people from especially the creative industries or not very tech-driven industries per se, to take part in innovation, because they're scared of these kind of technology developments and because they are not used to work with them. And there has been, especially if it comes to cross-sector innovation, all of these buzzwords in the last couple of years, which change all the time. So at the moment, every innovation seems to be driven by AI, for example, or blockchain technology was a thing. I almost feel like it's 2 years ago that this was a buzz and almost ended already. So there's always these new technologies that people have in mind. However, what we saw in our projects and where we see the biggest impact that we could have in order to facilitate cross-sector innovation is not the development of completely new technology or building on this new technology, but rather the most successful cross-sector innovation projects were built on more incremental innovation. Incremental innovation here refers for us to these small improvements made to firms' existing products or services or their processes. So generally, these much more low cost and easier to implement improvements help further differentiate our creative industry firms that we try to support, to further differentiate them from competition, enables them to improve what they are doing or improve the content, the products and services they already have. Which increases their market viability and often is built on their existing portfolio. So also this includes R&D, for example, in business model innovation, an area where we see really great opportunities for media online services because they are struggling to capture the old revenue they are used to capture without the internet really enabling this distribution of content. And in our effort, we do not only support pure technology-driven innovation, business model innovation on internet platforms, but we also, for example, support the creation of innovative ways of storytelling in film and news. So this is something that might take part in the online sphere for storytelling, but the innovation processes or the innovation that is happening is basically in the old analog world of them working and how they are making audiovisual content, film, news, and so on. So we had a project that really tried to find a way of innovating the ways a news story was told, and not in a sense of bringing it online or so on, but really the way of how people can perceive news. And this is what I wanted to highlight as well, that it's also about this incremental innovation that enables cross-sector collaborations and create really new innovations that can help these firms and the sectors to move into a more digital world. So this was Listen 6. We have prepared a little more engaging part now because we have talked for almost 40 minutes.